In this video, we're going to talk about percents and percent conversion. So converting percents to decimals and fractions, and then the other way around. So let's start and talk about what a percent really means. So the word percent means for every hundred or hundredths. Okay, in the first video, we talked about different place values, and we said the hundredths place is two numbers after the decimal place. So for example, if you were looking at the number 435.23, this would be 435 and 23 hundredths, because that the number goes out to the hundredths place, which is where that 3 is. And so if you had a percentage like 1%, that would be like 1/100th, 1 out of every 100. It would also be the same as 0.01, because again, that hundredths place is the second place value to the right of the decimal. And so that can come in handy when we're doing percent conversions. So the first one we're going to look at is percent to decimal. So for example, let's say we have a percentage like 87%. If you want to convert that to a decimal, all you have to do is drop the percent sign, so you just write 87, and you move the decimal point 2 places to the left, which is essentially the same thing as dividing the number by 100. And so if you look at this number, you might say, well, there is no decimal point. Well, there is, it's just you don't see it explicitly written. So it's always at the very end of the number to the right of the last digit if you don't see it already written in the problem. So you put the decimal point there, you move it 2 spots to the left, and you're done. You get 0.87. So that's the decimal for 87%. If you would like to divide by 100, you could take 87 and divide by 100, and you can see that the calculator gives us 0.87 as well. For percent to fraction, so we'll use our 87% for this also, we're going to drop the percent sign. So you drop this percent sign and you write the number over 100. And so I'm going to write 87 over 100, and then you're going to reduce the fraction. So in this case, 87 over 100 is not reducible, so you're going to just stop and that would be the end, but some fractions are reducible. One thing you can do is you can use, if you have a TI-34 calculator or a graphing calculator, you can use your calculator to help you reduce if fractions are not your thing. I'll give you another example real quick that is reducible. So let's say we had a percent like 20%. So we would write 20, we drop the percent sign, we write 20 over 100, and then we would reduce. Now you could certainly reduce this by hand by finding a number that goes into 20 and 100. So you could divide these both by 10. You could divide them both by 20, actually, is the greatest common factor. But it really doesn't matter what you divide by, as long as you keep dividing by a common factor until you can't divide anymore. And so if I were to divide these both by 10, I would get 2/10, and then I'd have it to do it again because I know that 2 can be divided by 2, and so can 10, so I would get 1/5. I could have also divided both of these by 20 right at the very beginning and gotten 1/5. I could use my TI-34 calculator by pressing the N over D button, and I'm going to put in the top, I'm going to put 20, and then on the bottom, I'm going to put 100. And then what you can do is you can press the simplify button, which is over here, and you hit enter. And this arrow tells you that it was reduced. It was reduced down and by a factor of 2. So it divided both those numbers by 2. Now the key here is you need to keep hitting the simplify button until you see a factor of 1, because then it means that it can be simplified even more. So see how it simplified it again to 5/25. It's not the final answer because we know the final answer is 1/5. So we're going to press simplify one more time, and we end up getting 1/5. That says factor of 5 there, which is true. It divided the previous fraction, the numerator and denominator, by 5. Let's hit simplify one more time just to be sure and see there. That proves to us, hey, 1/5 can't be reduced anymore because it reduced it by a factor of 1. So you keep hitting the simplify button until you see factor equal 1, and then you know you can't reduce it anymore. And so 1/5, we knew 1/5 was the right answer when we did it by hand, but that's how you could use your calculator. And then real quick, I'll show you also with the graphing calculator, in case you have one of those, what you could do. Here, let me move it over a little bit. There we go. All you have to do is for 20 over 100 is you do 20 divided by 100, enter. So this calculator, at least this version I have, doesn't have that N over D button. Some of them do, but not all. So you can just divide it in the calculator, and then you hit math, and then see how it says fraction at the top. You hit enter, enter, and then it reduces it to the 1/5. Now with the graphing calculator, you don't have to worry about, oh, did I reduce it enough? Because it automatically just reduces it to lowest terms, as opposed to what the 35 or the 34 does. It'll reduce it a little bit at a time. So hopefully that'll help you if you're not great at reducing by hand. So for this next part, we're going to go decimal to percentage. So if I wanted to go backwards, so let's say, I'll make up a new example. Let's say we have a decimal 0.45. If I wanted to take that decimal and make it a percent, what I would do is I would take this decimal and I would move it 2 spots to the right. It's the opposite of what I did up here. And then I would get 45%. That's also the same as multiplying the decimal by 100. Every time you multiply by a factor of 10, it moves the decimal right, however many zeros you have in the multiple of 10. So you can see right here, if I take 0.45 and you multiply by 100, you end up getting 45%. So either method it works, moving the decimal or multiplying by 100. You just pick whichever one works for you. And then the last one, fraction to a percent. So let's use the fraction 1/8 as an example. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to convert this to a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. So this fraction bar is really just like a division symbol. This means 1 divided by 8. So you can do that by hand, or probably easiest just to use a calculator, and then you get this decimal 0.125. And then it becomes a problem similar to what we just had up here with the 0.45. We have a decimal, here let me fix that 0, it almost looks like a 1, and it is not. Then you're going to take this decimal and you're going to move it 2 places to the right, or multiply by 100. So I take the decimal, move it 2 spots to the right, and I get 12.5%. And so that's how I go from 1/8 to the percent of 12.5%. Now let's jump into some examples. So with this first example, we're going to convert each percent to both decimal form and fraction form. I'm going to do the decimal first. That's the easiest. So to convert to a decimal, all we have to do is drop the percentage sign, and we take the decimal, which is, remember, if you don't see it, it's always hiding there to the right of the last digit, and then you're going to move it 2 spots to the left, and so you end up getting 0.85. Remember, that's the same thing as 85 divided by 100 if you want to do that in your calculator. Then we're going to let's do the fraction. So for the fraction, we're going to drop our percent sign, we're going to write 85 over 100, and we're going to reduce. So one way you could reduce this is you could divide both of these numbers by 5, and you end up getting 17/20. You could also use your calculator. So you could press the N over D button and do 85 over 100, and then press the simplify button until you get a factor of 1. Now it reduced both of these by 5, just like we did here, and this is the lowest terms. You can't reduce any more, but sometimes it is helpful just to keep doing it until you see that 1 there, and that tells you can't do it any further. So it's just confirmation that you got the lowest terms. So those are our decimal and fractions for 85%. So for our next one, this one's a little bit different because we've got a decimal in the percentage, so we haven't done one like that yet. So let's start with the decimal. So again, that's easiest. We take 37.5, drop the percent sign, and move that decimal 2 spots to the left, and so we get 0.375. And again, you could take 37.5, I'm just going to put an or, and divide by 100, and that'll also get you that 0.375. And then for fraction, this one's a little bit more complicated because you take the 37.5, you write it over 100, but it's actually not proper to leave a decimal as part of a fraction. So what you have to do is a little trick to get rid of that decimal in the fraction. And one thing you can do is you can always multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. It doesn't change the fraction, it just changes how it looks. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply these both by 10. And the reason I'm choosing 10 is a special number. It's any multiple of 10 is going to move the decimal place to the the right. And so by multiplying by 10, it moves it one place to the right, which is all I need. And so it does it to the top and we get 375. And then I also move that bottom decimal. I know you don't see it, but it's to the right of that 100. It moves that to the right, and then we've got to put a little placeholder 0 there, and we end up getting 1,000. If the decimal was, if we had to move it more than just one place, we could multiply by 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, however many zeros we need in order to get that decimal to go away. And then we still have to reduce here. So these two numbers, we could reduce them like we've done before. We could find a common factor. The greatest common factor of these two numbers is 125. If you divide both by 125, you end up getting 3/8. But, maybe you're not, fast with numeracy and you don't know that 125 is the greatest common factor. So we can use our TI-34 or the graphing calculator. Remember, in the graphing calculator, you're just going to divide those two and press math, enter, enter. So we're going to use our N over D button, 375 over 1,000. And I use my right arrow to get out of the fraction, and then I hit simplify, enter. Now in this case it just divided it by 5, both numerator and denominator, and so I get a bigger fraction than what I got because I divided by 125. So that means I can still keep going, because remember, the factor, we need to keep going until the factor says 1. So I'm going to do it one more time. It still says factor of 5. It reduced it by 5. And now we're at 3/8, which we know is probably the right answer, but I'm going to do it one more time until I see that factor of 1, and that confirms, yes, 3/8, that is the reduced fraction. We've got our right answer. So that's 3/8 is equivalent to 37.5%. Okay, so last one, we're going to do 0.03, so I'm going to do the decimal. So I write down my number, I don't write down the percent, and then I take my decimal and I move it to left, and I get 0.003. I could also write 0.03. Actually, you know what? I just made a mistake. I should have 3 zeros there because I'm moving it 2 places to the left. So let me go ahead and I'm going to put one more 0 there. There we go. And then a decimal. I can write 0.0003 if you would like. The 0 in the front is not necessary, but you can write it if you want. So you should have 3 zeros before that 3. And then for the fraction, we're going to take 0.03 divided by 100. And write it like that. And just like the last one, I don't like this decimal in the fraction, so I want to get rid of it. So I need it moved 2 places to the right so it can go away, and in order to get it to do that, I need to multiply that by 100. If you take, you can even see in the calculator, if you don't believe me, 0.03 times 100 equals 3. So now I don't have a decimal there. So that's really helpful. So that gives me a 3 in the numerator. Well, if I do it to the numerator, then I have to do it to the denominator. And so in the denominator, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So I've got a 1, and then I've got 4 zeros in the denominator, and I always want to see if I can reduce. Now I know this is not reducible, they don't have any common factors, but if you were not sure, you could take your calculator and you could do 3 over 10,000. So we got 4 zeros, and then we're going to hit the simplify button, and then, whoops, I wonder why it had a problem with that. Let's see. You know what? It might have been that this is just too big. So the TI-34 has some limitations. It can only hold so many digits. And so this is not liking the fact that we've got a 10,000 in the denominator. So that's not helpful there. But what you can do is you can look at the number. You can try to see if 3 goes into 10,000. That is something you can do with your calculator. So you could take, I'm just going to clear this out, 10,000. And you're going to divide it by 3 just to see. 3 doesn't go into that number. So the only number that goes into 3 is 3, and it can't go into 10,000, so you know you're done and you can't reduce it any further. Okay, so the next set of examples, we're going to convert each of these decimals to a percent, and then if needed, round to the hundredths place. So when you're asked to round, you always want to round after you convert to a percent. So that's really important. So round after converting So we're going to take our decimal, and in order to convert this to a percentage, all we have to do is move the decimal 2 spots to the right. Okay, so 47.2%, or we could also multiply it by 100. And then we round to the nearest hundredths place. Now in this example, we don't have a hundredths place because 2 is in the tens place, so you would just be done. There's nothing to do there. So the second one, I take 1.03, I move my decimal 2 spots to the right, or you could take this number and multiply it by 100 in your calculator, and you're going to get 103%. Like the last one, there's no rounding needed because the hundredths place is not present here because we don't have any digits after the decimal place. It's just 103%. And then the last example, I'm going to take this decimal and I'm going to move it 1, 2 to the right. So I get 3.567%. And then, now in this one, I am going to be able to round because it says round to the hundredths place. So I count after the decimal, we've got the tens place and the hundredths place. So I look to the right, that 7 tells me to bump the 6 up to a 7. So I'm going to have 3.57%. And then this 7 just goes away. So my final answer is 3.57%. All right, so last 3 here. So percent conversions, example 3, convert each fraction to a percent. And then if needed, we're going to round at the end. So we're always, just like the last one, we're going to convert to percent first. Then we round after. So I'm going to follow my steps. 7/8, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 7 divided by 8. And we're going to use a calculator for that. So I'm going to come over here, 7 divided by 8. Okay, and then I get a decimal. So I've got 0.875. And then step 2 is to either multiply by 100 or move the decimal to the right 2 places. So 1, 2, and you get 87.5%. And then I check, I was almost going to circle, but we got to check for the rounding. So it says if needed, round to the tens place. Well, this is the tens place. There isn't anything to the right of it, so we just leave it as 87.5. And then the nice thing with these examples, if you wanted to do the times 100 thing, instead of just moving the decimal, you've already got the number in your calculator, so it's no big deal to just press times 100. Because it's already in there, and then that'll give you the percentage. Okay, so next one, 5/4, just like the last one, we're going to take the numerator and divide by the denominator. So I'm going to do 5 divided by 4 equals, and I get 1.25, and that's the percentage. But I'm asked to round to the tenth place. Oh, you know what? That's not. I just skipped a step. Not good. It's not the percentage. You're going to do 5 divided by 4, and then you have to move your decimal 2 spots to the right, or, like I was saying in the last example, you multiply by 100, and you get 125%. And I knew it was the wrong answer because I thought about it, and I'm like, well, 4 out of 4 would be 100%, so 5 out of 4 has to be greater than 100%. So that was one thing that caught my eye and kind of told me that I got the wrong answer. And then we're rounding to the tenths place. I don't have any digits to the right of the decimal since the decimal is at the end. It's kind of hidden. So I'm just going to circle this. That's my right answer, or final answer. And then 5/6, last one. So I take the numerator divided by the denominator. So I'm going to do that in my calculator, and I get this decimal. Now this is a good one because it's a repeating decimal, so it's good that we have some different types of examples here. So the 3 keeps on going. Now remember, like especially with this one, we're going to need to round, but we want to round after we convert to a percent. So we're going to multiply by 100, which remember just moves our decimal 2 spots to the right, and so you get 83.3333. That keeps going. Then I round to the tens place. So I look at the tens place, and then I look to the right. Since it's a 3, we just leave that 3 alone and drop all the digits to the right. So it's just going to be 83.3%, and that's going to be my final answer.